Hi, I recently finished reading Bill Gates' new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, and I really enjoyed it. And I was thinking that I could share some of the things that I learned from it in this video. I hope you'll find it valuable. Let's get started. In one of the earlier chapters of the book, Bill describes this mental framework that he has developed to help him process new information about the climate. And I found one part in particular of this framework to be really helpful. And basically, to get the big picture of greenhouse gases and their emissions, you only really have to remember one number, and that is 51 billion. Now, what this is referring to is the 51 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents that the world is currently emitting each year. And we talk about carbon dioxide equivalents because, there are a bunch of different greenhouse gases and they contribute more or less to the greenhouse effect. So what that metric is doing is basically allowing us to compare them all. This particular number is useful because whenever you read a book or an article about the climate, there are usually a bunch of numbers thrown around. For example, you might read something along the lines of, by doing this we will save 10 million tons of carbon dioxide, and that equals 2 million cars not driven for a year. And when you read that, you usually go like, wow, that's great. And I mean, of course it's great, but how significant is it? Well, if you put it in relation to the 51 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents that we have each year, you realize that 10 million tons of carbon dioxide only really amounts to 0.02% of the total emissions. And I think that percentage is way more helpful when it comes to understanding the big picture and trying to get a sense of how significant something is. One thing that is very clear about climate change is that we'll have to do everything we can to reduce our current emissions of 51 billion tons to zero as soon as possible if we want to avoid the most severe consequences. Now, a significant part of these emissions could be reduced by replacing our energy sources and deploying the technologies that are available to us today. We haven't done it yet because it's complex and it's expensive, but it's possible, at least in theory. A more disturbing thought is that there are a couple of areas which are absolutely crucial to the well-being and having a functional society, but where there's basically no realistic path for us to take where we will reach zero emissions. These include synthetic fertilizer to feed the world and cement and steel to support our buildings and our infrastructure. We don't know how to get the emissions related to these things to zero, so we'll have to find some other way of capturing that carbon through some other process. Here's where it gets complicated. By 2050, we're expected to be almost 10 billion people on this planet, and we all need to eat, so we're expected to use even more of this fertilizer in the future. Moreover, the world's building stock is expected to have doubled by 2060. What this means is that we'll put up the equivalent of a New York every single day for the next 40 years. So we have a few areas where we don't know how to get the emissions down to zero, but we know that we will need them in the future. And I think this is a very important piece of information. We also have to consider the fact that an additional 2 billion people on Earth will drive up the energy consumption. And then I haven't even mentioned the 860 million people who are living without electricity today. And I mean, as that changes, of course their energy consumption will go up as well. With that being said, I mean, it's a good thing that these 860 million people are getting access to electricity and consuming more energy. It means that they can refrigerate their food and they can study after the sun has gone down and so on. So we want this to happen. It's just that we have to solve the energy problem. And the main problem with clean energy is that it's harder to store and it's more expensive than fossil fuels. So we'll have to come up with a way to solve that somehow. If you ask Bill Gates, the only way we'll get out of this tricky situation is by accelerating the rate of innovation. And in his book he talks a lot about green premiums. And what he means with this is the price difference of something relative to their fossil fuel alternative. And if we want to have any chance of achieving our climate goals, we need to make sure that we turn these green premiums negative as soon as absolutely possible. For this to happen, we'll need collective coordinated actions on both national and international levels. To start with, we need to put a price on carbon, because fossil fuels are very inexpensive today. Like, gasoline is cheaper than Diet Coke, for example. But this low price is misleading because it doesn't reflect the true cost of mitigating the harmful effects that it has on our environment. But even if we were to impose a carbon tax or something along those lines, it wouldn't be enough to reduce our net emissions from 51 billion tons to zero. No, for this, Bill Gates says, we need to do everything we can to encourage and accelerate innovation, because it is only through new innovations that we can push down the price on clean energy and clean technology. If we play it safe, we will fail. Before I end this video, I just want to state the obvious and remind you that this book is about how to avoid a climate disaster if you ask Bill Gates. There are certainly other proposed solutions out there which are quite different from his approach. As an example, some argue that we should strive for something called degrowth instead. I just started reading this book about it, and those who support it basically argue that endless economic growth isn't really viable. Instead, we should downscale our production and consumption and shift our focus away from growth. Now, let me know what you think about that in the comments, but one thing that all these people seem to agree on is that the best thing you can do as an individual is to learn more about the climate and, if you can, engage in the political process. I hope that this video provided some value to you. And I would definitely recommend you to read the book if you want to learn more about the climate challenges that we face and why they are so tough to solve. If you liked this video, feel free to subscribe, and in either case, thank you for watching.